Hello, I'm Joshua Sparrow, Executive Director of the Brazelton Touchpoint Center, and this is Learning to Listen, Conversations for Change. In this episode, we will be listening to Debi Jackson. And Debi will tell us how she came to understand that her transgender daughter was a messenger. Her daughter's message to teach her to listen and to launch on her life's mission. Debi's mission? To help us all to listen to children's messages, especially the ones that are hard to hear, the ones that may call into question everything we were ever brought up to believe. Thank you so much for joining us today. Over 3,000 people from around the country and around the world have registered for today's webinar. So tell us who you are and where you're from in the chat. I can see that you've already started. Welcome. Few little details before we get going. First, if you're having difficulty viewing the webinar in Zoom, you can watch it live on our Facebook page. All you have to do is search for the Brazelton Touchpoint Center on Facebook, and you'll see the live stream video pinned to the top of our Brazelton Touchpoints Center page. Today, our superb interpreter, Maria Jose Gutierrez, will join us once again from Bogota, Colombia, and will be simultaneously translating our webinar in Spanish. Thank you so much, Maria Jose. Now, to access this Spanish translation, click on the interpretation icon in your Zoom controls. You find them at the bottom of your screen. Then just select Spanish, and so that you don't have to hear the English in the background, you can select mute original audio. La conversación de hoy será en español e inglés. En los controles de esta reunión, haga clic en la interpretación, haga clic en el idioma que le gustaría escuchar. Para escuchar solo español, haga clic en silenciar audio original. And please use the chat feature if you have a comment to share or if you need help with a technical issue. You can also email with technical issues, Kayla Savelli, and you'll see her email address posted in the chat. If you have a question for Debi, please use the question answer feature that you'll find again at the bottom of your screen to share your question with us. Now, tomorrow, you'll receive a thank you email with a link to a recording of today's webinar and a link to our feedback survey. And we hope that you'll fill out the feedback survey. And if you do, that way you'll be able to get a certificate of attendance if you need one. And you'll also find in that email a link to the recording of today's webinar. Before we begin, I want to be sure to thank our sponsor, the Burke Foundation, and our Brazelton Touchpoint Center production team, Kayla Savelli, Ashley Gaddis, and Michael Accardi. We could not do this without all of you. And now, I'd like to introduce today's guest, Debi Jackson. Debi is a nationally known advocate for transgender rights. She is the mother of a transgender child and frequently travels to speak about trans kids. She was awarded the 2016 Role Model Award by the National Education Association's GLBT Caucus. And through her advocacy, she works with organizations like PFLAG, which stands for Parents, Families, and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. She's worked for the Human Rights Campaign, Gender Odyssey, and the Trevor Project. Her involvement with these organizations, as well as her personal connection now to several thousand transgender adults and families with transgender children, has made Debi truly an invaluable expert on trans inclusivity needs and solutions, and on how to help us all understand those needs and to work together towards those solutions. We are so lucky to have you with us today, Debi. Thank you so much for joining us. And I know when you and I talked, you thought it would be good before we actually start for you to say a couple of words about the kinds of questions you get and the way you listen to questions and respond to them before we move into the questions that I have for you.
Hi, thank you for having me here today. Debi Jackson, my pronoun are she, her, hers, for anyone who needs to reference them later. And thank you. Yes, I first wanted to just let everyone know I am open to any question that you have, whether you're concerned that it's offensive, you don't know how to word it correctly, you're not sure if it's something that you should ask a parent or a trans adult that you come across. I didn't know anything about trans issues until I had to confront it with my daughter, and I made a lot of mistakes along the way. I had some wonderfully patient, kind people who let me stumble, asking the wrong kinds of questions, and taught me a lot. So, if I am one of the first encounters that you have with the subject of trans issues, please ask me those uncomfortable or awkward questions, and that will make every encounter that you have with a trans person later on that much easier and better for them.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Debbie. It takes, I think, a lot of courage and strength to be as open as you are, and I sure appreciate it. So let's start by finding out from you what you want to have us know about you, and I guess maybe how your life before you became a parent prepared you, or maybe didn't prepare you for what parenthood has turned out to have in store for you.
My life before I became a parent, I never wanted to really have kids. Husband. In high school, I was voted the person most likely to have a big, powerful corporate career and not have a family. So the fact that I now talk about parenthood and my I grew up in conservative family from the South. I consider myself from.
I think we're having internet connections. I can't tell if it's on your side,
Oh,
maybe. Um, we may need you to
okay.
call in. I'm going to see if Debbie can call us in, so at least we can hear Debbie. We're going to ask Debbie to call in so we can continue the conversation that way. Looks like Debbie's on her way back. We still have lots of people joining us. Are you back with us, Debbie? Oh, there
Can
you
you
are.
see me?
We can see you, and I think we can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. What a horrible time for my internet at my house to just quit on me.
It's okay. People are still joining us, and we're actually still 1 minute ahead of our schedule. So, so take your time. We lost you when you were saying in high school you were voted the student who would be most likely to have a big corporate career, and I think you were
Yes.
going to say and probably not have children.
Yes, exactly. A big corporate career and not have children. I grew up in a very, very conservative family, military background. I come from Alabama. That's where I've spent most of my years. And Southern Baptist, went to church at least 3 times a week. I was my high school chaplain and led a prayer over the PA system every single morning before school started for my junior and senior years. So I don't know that I really was prepared to be a parent. Apparently I was as prepared as my internet was prepared today to have me speak to you. I was fully invested in my corporate career, and at the time that we ended up bringing my child home to homeschool, which we can get into later, I was terrified because I thought, now I have to like teach my kid nursery rhymes and things. I don't know how to do these things because I barely remember them from my own childhood. So I think growing up in this very, very conservative family, I had certain gendered expectations. Women were supposed to behave one way and men were supposed to behave another way. Like, I don't swear to this day. It's the one part of my Southern Baptist conservative upbringing I can't let go of. Men can swear like anything, but women are not supposed to. It's not deemed culturally refined or delicate enough or something. So I had a lot of those sorts of expectations put on me about what femininity was, what masculinity was, how you're supposed to raise your kids. And I've had to let a lot of that go.
And I'm wondering, with your Southern Baptist upbringing, if there were some things that made it particularly challenging to welcome what parenthood has brought to you, and also whether or not there were some things about the spirituality inside of what you were brought up that in some ways may still serve you. And I think we're still having problems with the internet connection. And if you're on your phone, you might need to disable the Wi-Fi connection and just do this through the phone service.
Oh, 1 second. Let me try that.
We can still see you, we can still hear you, so we're okay. Debbie's trying to reconnect by phone so that we can bypass her wobbly internet. And I see a question in the chat about the presentation being recorded. And yes, we will make the link available for you, and you will receive it in an email from us to you tomorrow.
Okay, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I have no idea if you can see me now, though.
Can't see you. Can't see you.
Okay, so it just is calling in through phone, and then we just get to look at you, lovely you.
Oh, God. Why don't we proceed, and we'll see if we can do it this way. And if there is a chance that you can see if your internet becomes more stable, we can try to pivot back to get to see you too.
Okay.
You know, so much of listening is nonverbal behavior, and what we communicate with our faces and facial expressions. There you are. So you're back. So I was just asking you about your, you know, the religious part of your upbringing, if there were some things that made being the parent of your transgender daughter harder, or if there were some kind of spirituality that you also got that in some ways has been a source of strength for you. You're on mute. There you go.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, now I'm on the phone too. I don't know what I'm doing. Okay.
It's working. It's
So,
working.
I can't hear you. I'm gonna have to do this.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We'll pretend
That'll
I've
work.
only been doing Zoom 18 times a day for the last year and a half. Okay, I think a lot of people have expected it to be a lot more difficult, you know, going from a Southern Baptist upbringing. For me, I don't know that I was ever a great Southern Baptist because I didn't want to go out and, knock on doors and bring all the people into church with me. My connection to my God has always been incredibly personal and private. And growing up in Alabama, my best friend was gay, and it was very obvious that he was gay, and I didn't see anything wrong with that. That's part of what made him the wonderful person that he was. So to see that our church did not respect that and wanted to exorcise the demon of homosexuality and out of him was painful to me. So I've had kind of a love-hate relationship with my church, not with my God, but with my church. And I think there's a significant difference between the two. Mankind is infallible. We make mistakes. So when I saw my child struggling in front of me, when I saw her at the age of 3 becoming more and more despondent and losing the sparkle in her eye, and I didn't understand why. And then when at the age of 4, she was able to tell us, you think that I'm a girl or I'm a boy, but I'm a girl on the inside, and very articulately tell us who she was. I had an aha moment. And after we went and saw specialists and talked to people about it, and they said, trust your child. And I had heard her saying she wanted to die and that God had made a mistake. I decided to trust her in that she must know. If a child at 4 is talking about that, then she must have a part of her spirit too that is really in pain. And there was nothing external that should have caused that pain. It had to be really internal and a deeply held sense of who she was. So for me, I believe, we are spiritual creatures first. Her body is a shell, and God knew her before he brought her into my life. And if you follow those teachings of the Bible, then she was given to me for a reason. There was a purpose for it. And it's a blessing to be able to know who she is truly in her heart, in her soul. And she has taught me a lot from that. I think a lot of times right now, sadly, we have preachers and ministers and priests who want to say that we are all clinging too much to the material world. And yet the way that they treat LGBT people is clinging to a very material idea of who that person is. They are ignoring their soul. They're ignoring who they say that they are. And they're just looking at the shell and trying to apply these arbitrary rules to it.
So are there ways in which having this daughter has changed you?
Oh, it's changed me a lot. I'm middle class, cisgender, heterosexual, white woman, educated, always had access to resources when I need it. And of course, I've dealt with sexism in my life and dealt with sexism in my career, but I have not had to struggle. And I grew up in a bubble. The ideas that my family taught me about what it is to be an American, what politics are, and what's right and what's wrong. It left me without a real understanding of the world and other human beings, because everything just seemed like it should be easy for everybody. And you go from that world to the same kind of bubble in college. You go to the same kind of bubble in your workplace and in the neighborhoods that you can live in. And being connected to a trans child and then having to leave behind that bubble and see what it's like for a marginalized person to exist in this world, to have that peripheral connection to it, taught me that I need to be listening to other people, and not only listening to them when I have the chance to hear their voices. I need to seek them out. I need to seek out different perspectives. I need to learn another family's truth and another person's truth. And, it changed me from being that straight ticket Republican voter who never thought about anything. Oh, I have conservative family values, fiscal responsibility, blah, 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 to now really understanding what those things do to other people. Just as one little example, for immigration, I would think we have rules follow the rules and you can come here. It's not a big deal. And then I realized how many LGBT people are fleeing persecution, how many trans women are desperate to get here just for safety. And the way that we're treating them is awful. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, let's abolish ICE and all these crazy, rules that we have. Let's protect everyone and bring them into the fold and love them and nurture them. And I mean, once a little bit of that bubble gets popped, or a little, once there's a hint that the bubble is not real and the bubble gets popped, everything changes for you. I don't know how anyone could go through this experience and not be absolutely completely changed.
I just love the light in your eye when you talk about how your daughter changed you, and when you talk about sort of coming out of this bubble. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you've learned about children who are transgender that you want to be sure all of us understand. Because when we did our Conversation for Change with Johanna and Aidan Olson-Kennedy, who I think you know, we learned from people that for many who were joining us, it was one of their early experiences just beginning to learn about children who are transgender. So tell us what you want to be sure we understand before we say goodbye today.
Yes, I want everyone to know that being transgender is not a choice, that it's a natural variation of humanity and a very beautiful one, and that it's complicated, and that trans people can have wonderful lives if they're just listened to and supported completely. I don't know that I would have thought about gender being something that a person would have to wrestle with. Certainly gender roles and some gender expression, we can always break out of the mold. But a trans person is breaking all the rules at once, and that makes us uncomfortable. But it's not the trans person's issue, it's our own issue with our levels of comfort. And it's okay for us to be pushed and have to move beyond our comfort zone. I think we should all challenge ourselves to do that. I want people to understand that you can't make someone not trans in the same way that you can't make them trans. You cannot teach a child to deny who they are. All you're going to do is harm them, give them a lot of doubts, internalize transphobia that the rest of us have been exposed to. I think if we broke down a lot of the barriers that we as adults have put up over time for boys and girls, in how we've defined what it is to be a boy or a girl, how you're supposed to play, what you play with, the colors that you like, how emotional you are, how physical you are, how loud you are. These are all these random things that should not have gender associated with them. And if we didn't teach kids to be a certain way or shame them if they don't match those expectations, we would figure out kids who are truly struggling with their gender, and we would know to listen to them sooner, because everyone breaks gender rules. And I think it's healthy for all of us to break those rules. A lot of kids do that and are still going to be happy with their gender. But if they're breaking those rules and they're still saying, wait, you've got it wrong. I'm not a girl. I'm not just a girl who likes those things. I'm a boy. It would be so much easier for all of us to listen, to identify them, and to help them become the person that they are.
We've got a question about how to encourage a family with a very young transgender child, and also how to encourage the childcare that they attend to support that child, as well as how to, help other families who may have questions. And, I'm wondering if you could talk with us about gender affirming care, both in the healthcare arena, because we've got folks in the healthcare arena, and also what that looks like in the childcare arena, because this is a very young transgender child, but as you said, for your daughter, it was age 3, age 4, and for many children, it's between ages 2 and 5 that they really know who they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Pre-puberty is all just going to be a social transition if a child tells you that they're a different gender and they need to transition. But there's also a lot of fluidity in the first few years. People are figuring out who they are. And I see two different types of parents generally. I see the ones who are very concerned with the gender rules and roles that they know of, and they're afraid to have their child break those rules. And they try to teach gendered behaviors because the idea of someone breaking those rules is so uncomfortable for them. And then on the other side, there are the ones who say, let's throw out all the rules. If you're, sometimes parents get a little too exuberant during those years and say, I think my kid's trans, let's go change their name and switch their pronouns and encourage them to not be a girl, to be a boy. And it's just moving a child from one binary position to another. And we know more about non-binary people now that we can, that pushing too much too fast can also be detrimental. So I think the best thing to do is, again, not label things. A lot of people get a little nervous that we labeled our child as transgender at the age of 4. We didn't use that word with her. She didn't know that. She told us we're a girl, so we listened to that she's a girl. And then we left the door open for her to figure out, was she a super feminine girl? Was she going to be a tomboy? Was she going to be something in between? Was she going to settle on they, them pronouns instead? And I think we just have so many fears of, we need to put people in boxes. And for a lot of parents, it's the fear of the unknown. They were given a sonogram, baby was born, they announced, you have a boy, you have a girl. And then all of a sudden, everything in their mind flooded through pictures of what the next 18, 20, 30 years were going to look like. And if something shakes that up, they don't know how to handle that disconnect. They want answers and they want them now. I know parents whose kids have been on a gender journey, as we call it, for 10 years, and they still don't know where their child's going to end up. And that's okay too. I think what a lot of us need to do is just kind of learn to step back and relax. Being there for your kid, being open-minded with them is going to give them the message that you love them and support them no matter what. And that's really the best message that you could give to your parent. Your child as a parent. Sorry.
We had a comment in the chat: how can labels help or hinder the process to learning about oneself and becoming one's true self? And I think you've spoken to that, particularly with this idea that early on and all the way through, there's questioning and exploration, and binary gender is not necessarily what it's really like for most of us. In that, many of us are breaking these rules to figure it out.
Yeah, and honestly, I think labels help some people sometimes. A lot of people, all the older trans people that I talk to, sometimes a teenager, they knew there was something going on. They knew something felt different about them, and they didn't know how to say it. And once they saw the word, once they read the word, once they heard it said, suddenly they were comfortable. They felt like they were at home. And labels can be a marvelous thing because it also lets you know you're not the only one. The world has a word for this because there are more people like you, and it can give you a sense of connection and community really quickly. But at the same time, like, look at the LGBTQIA and on. We have so many letters now, and it's a wonderful thing because sometimes people are coming up with their own labels. And they're not going to let another person define them. They're going to figure out how to define themselves in a way that feels most authentic. So I think that's a lovely thing too.
So there are a lot of questions about how to help parents who aren't able to accept what their child is trying to tell them, how to help childcare workers support children who are transgender. And that gets us to something that we wanted to talk about, which is how do you listen to and how do you enter into conversations with people who start out at a very different place? And who may not yet have had the opportunity or recognize the opportunity of being able to listen to a child who is transgender the way you have. How do you enter into those and move through those conversations, for example, with, you know, parents who aren't able to listen, and then, you know, I hope you can get get to telling us about how you have those conversations with politicians who haven't yet had a chance to listen.
Mm-hmm. I think for people who aren't willing to listen, you have to turn the tables and be able to listen to them. Ask a lot of questions. So if someone has an idea of, you know, or says something like there are only two genders, or gender's no different from sex, X, 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 Y, that's all it is. Asking questions. Well, how do you know that? Have you really done the research? Because a lot of times people want to say, prove to me that your kid's transgender, prove that something can exist. Well, let's ask them, you prove it, because I know, I can see it. But also if someone, I think saying or asking, tell me more, you know, tell me about that. Why do you believe that? Why do you feel that way? Have you met someone who broke gender norms? Why are you uncomfortable with that? And really letting someone else break things down for themselves and process it, and ask questions that they probably never felt they needed to be asked, or they never needed to ask themselves. And then I can point to my own levels of learning. You know, I had to go back and I was talking to a non-binary friend about this about a year ago, and said, I've never been comfortable calling myself a woman. And I don't know why. I don't believe that means that I'm non-binary, but I'm not comfortable with womanhood. Even after having 2 children, I don't call myself a woman. It feels really uncomfortable to me. And it made me start questioning. You know, I was known as the tomboy. I was considered more boyish than my 2 brothers were, you know, based on interests and all of that. If I lived in a different time and place, could I have been a non-binary person? And then I realized it was just all the misogyny that I grew up with, that I didn't want to be the version of womanhood that I was told I was supposed to be in the Southern Baptist Church. I didn't want to be the version that, you know, let my husband rule my home the way that my mom said she had to let my dad make every decision. So it made me question my own gender for a little while. And a lot of people might think, oh my gosh, you were in your mid-40s and you started to question your gender, but why not? I mean, we all have ideas of what it means to be a man or a woman, and where did they come from? And maybe if we started looking inward, we would have more compassion to people about why we're putting certain expectations on other people. And I saw the question pop up in the chat thing real quick about non-binary. So since I keep saying that, non-binary is a person who does not feel a complete connection to either being a man or a woman. They might feel like they are a good 50-50 split of both. They might feel no connection to gender at all. And that would be feeling agender, like they just don't understand the concept of gender. I'm a person. I'm Debbie. I don't understand what you mean, what it is to be a man or a woman, masculine or feminine. You say that there's green or yellow and blue, and that there's something in between that's supposed to be green. I'm just seeing all of these shades of green. I don't understand the difference of what yellow is or what blue is. That's one of the best, most beautiful, lovely descriptions of non-binary that I've ever heard. There's all these other shades. Why would you be stuck with just the 2 colors? So that's a simple explanation of non-binary.
And you know, earlier, Deb, you talked about your God and how this has not changed your God for you. And I'm wondering if that is ever anything that you're able to bring to some of these conversations with people who are starting out in a very different place.
I try. I try. As you mentioned, talking to legislators, and right when we got on today, I was watching the vote in the Texas Senate because there are some horrible anti-trans bills, mostly targeting trans youth, moving across the country right now. And the one today was to ban medical care for anyone under the age of 18. And the person who brought the bill was trying to make it about protecting kids, but then finally today in his speech said that it's a moral issue. And he just believes that God made people one way and you can't get it wrong, and we shouldn't be doing damage to what God made because of morality. My God gave me a transgender daughter. My God doesn't care what her body is. My God cares that she feels loved and connected to community. And I've known so many other trans people who have struggled the way that she did at 3 and 4, saying, why did God punish me, giving me this body and making me uncomfortable? God didn't punish anyone. God made you. God knows who you are. And when you are at a place that you're comfortable with that, you then are able to share that and share the gift of who you are with the rest of the world. And that's teaching the rest of us something. And I've known many people who have rejected God and religion and faith completely until they were comfortable with themselves, until they've transitioned, until people in their lives are affirming them. And then suddenly they have that sense of peace and they feel connected to a divine being or a creator again. And I think that's the most beautiful testament to what our spirituality is. Just being seen and acknowledged connects you back to the divine.
So now that we're in this divine place, I hesitate to ask this question, but so that we can keep moving in that direction, I feel like I have to ask, since you mentioned this bill in the Texas Senate, why do you think right now there is this pile-on all over the country of anti-trans legislative efforts?
Well, we know that historically in our country, there has been a particular type of person with particular background who has been in power. And those people are becoming the minority, but they are still in power. And that is mostly been older white men with a Judeo-Christian background. And there's a very easy way to control people, like the Southern Baptist Church. I didn't realize the Southern Baptist Church while I was growing up was created just to perpetuate slavery. And I certainly saw the way that they treated women. So I understood that it was to control women and women's bodies. And I think we can see how over the last, few years, there has been a fight about controlling bodies. Not few years, probably, let's just say decades. And there are people who are struggling to keep that control and continue, having that power and enjoying that position of power. So a few years ago, they had a major loss. Marriage equality was declared the law of the land, and they needed another boogeyman to bring people to fight against. They needed something to get people to the polls. And honestly, so few people had ever met a trans person or had an idea of what being trans is that it became a very easy target. There's just, until you have a personal connection to someone, sometimes, it's easy to dismiss it. Sadly, I grew up that way, so I understood that. But right now, the attacks are focused on trans kids because they think there are so few that it's an easy target. There's not going to be a large enough group of trans kids, trans adults, and allies to come push back against it. It's very divisive. It's very easy to say to someone a few years ago with the bathroom bills, a man in a dress is going to come into a bathroom and assault your daughter. Well, most of the assaults, there are so many assaults from priests and coaches, not from trans people or people pretending to be trans in the bathroom. But we don't want to address that because that might implicate some of those people who are in positions of power right now. And I think it's the exact same thing happening today. There are several groups who are out there writing this legislation, and trying to peddle it to anyone they can find in any state legislature to make it an issue. It was never an issue. It wasn't about the bathrooms a few years ago. It's not about a transgender girl overtaking sports now. It's not about taking away best practice, evidence-based, life-saving healthcare from kids because it's experimental. Like yesterday, the author of this bill called Trans Kids said that as parents, we're essentially treating our kids as a petri dish. I'm sorry, but no, you don't get to dehumanize my child in that way and not have me come fighting and swinging with everything that I have. So I think they just thought that we would meekly and quietly go away. And I will not. They will have to arrest me. They will have to charge me with child abuse before I get, take the care away from my daughter that she needs. And they just want it to be a wedge issue. It's using our children as political pawns because they really don't care about them, sadly.
And it's such a distraction from the many enormous challenges that we're all facing that for some reason are not on the agenda of these folks. You talked about the ways in which a lot of this legislation is attacking not only children who are transgender, but also really very directly their parents, as if it weren't already challenging, as you've begun to talk about, for parents in their own personal process of becoming the parent of the child that they have. And there've been a number of questions and comments in the chat and the Q&A box about the process and of some parents who are living through this process themselves are, wanting you to speak more to the listening that you've done with other parents to learn about what this process is like and, where the hard parts are and how people find their way through.
I think a lot of the struggle that parents have is twofold. Fear. They want to protect their children at all costs. And as soon as you have an inkling that your child is gender nonconforming or transgender, you start researching. And when you research, you see the high statistics of suicidality that our kids deal with and depression and anxiety. And you see how pervasive violence against particularly Black trans women and Black or Latina trans women are in our country. And you hear about, that when you were growing up, gay kids were bullied in school, and you think this is going to be so much worse. I need to protect my child. I don't want them to transition. I want them to grow out of this because I'm so afraid of their future. And one of the questions that I had, which I'm horrified to admit, but one of the questions that I said to myself is, who's going to love my child? Who's going to love someone who is so different that people don't understand them? And that's an intense fear that parents have. And that will be one reason they keep from supporting their child and moving forward. Another one is that a lot of parents go through a very intensive period of mourning. And it sounds a little bit bizarre. Your child's right here in front of you, but they mourn all of those ideas that they had for the future. They mourn picturing their child as a little ballerina and walking their daughter down the aisle and that kind of thing. So we have all these expectations in our head that we have to get rid of to appreciate seeing the child who's in front of us. And a lot of parents really, really struggle with that. I didn't. I think sometimes it's easier when your child transitions at a younger age. You don't have as many memories attached to it. If your child comes out in their teens or 20s or 40s, you have all of that time that you have to go back to your head and think, did I miss something? Could they have had a better life if I had only known, if I could have done things again? So there's that to battle with too. But, when I had a 4-year-old who wanted to die, and who tried to jump out of a car because she was just done being called a boy. I wasn't going to mourn boyhood. I was fully going to embrace girlhood, because that meant that I kept her here and I kept her alive. And that's a really heavy thing too. And I don't want other parents to have to get to that point to feel like it's okay to trust a child moving forward, whatever their age is. That it's much better to see and appreciate the person in front of you, because honestly, when they transition, they become a better version because they're a happier version. They're a more confident and a more light person. And that person that you thought you were going to mourn, you don't need to mourn, because you're going to get the even better person in the end.
And there are a lot of questions and comments asking what kinds of supports would have been helpful to you during this process, or might be helpful to other parents, whether it's from medical providers or teachers or other professionals who were around you, could have been around you.
Mm-hmm. I did not have any support for years. I had to leave my job. Friends abandoned us. Our family has completely disowned us because we were so immoral to them. So I didn't have support. And the reason that I became a passionate educator wanting to work with teachers in particular is because we didn't have support from school either. And that's why we ended up homeschooling. These days, there are incredible groups around the country. PFLAG groups have become much more open. I became our PFLAG chapter, and I think my second meeting there, because they needed people with trans kids to come in. There's another organization that's called Transparent US that is in several different places. I work with an organization based in Seattle called Trans Families, and we have support groups online now for families all across the country. There's conferences that you could go to when we're not all stuck at home Zooming and failing at Zooming. So hopefully those will be revived and you can go and meet other families. I think really just one of the best things that you can do to support a family going through this is to say, I believe you and I trust you. Because a lot of people come in with good intentions and say, but are you sure? What if your child changes their mind in a year? Aren't you going to be embarrassed that you've gone through all of this trouble? And that's the worst thing that you can do, because if you get to the point where you're supporting a child in transitioning, you've already wrestled with all those questions. You've already questioned your sanity. You've already questioned if this is a phase or if it's something bigger and you should move forward. And we need to make sure that people know that saying those sorts of questions, or even saying, you're so brave, I couldn't do this, is not helpful, because you could do it and you should do it. This is not something that should be hard for us to go through, and to say that we're so brave and strong for dealing with a trans child or that sort of thing is not the most supportive language. So that's just a little tip for allyship, but also encourage your city to have a non-discrimination ordinance in place. Encourage your schools to look at their policies about bullying and about diversity, and make sure that they are inclusive, and ask them to become more inclusive and to get training if they can. Talk to your clergy in advance and ask them if they would be affirming and welcoming, so that you know that your church is a safe place for LGBT people. So I really think a lot of what we can do is to just step up and challenge other people to become more inclusive, so that it's not on a trans child or the parents to go out and have to fight that battle over and over and over and over in every public space that they're in. Oh, muted.
So
now it's not just me.
No, yeah. What about for the children around your child, for example, or other children, and perhaps those who transition later. There are lots of questions in the chat and the Q&A box about how you work with a whole classroom or in a group home with, moving towards understanding of the children around the child who is transgender.
Mm-hmm. There are a lot of great resources for that. I would direct a lot of people to a group like the Human Rights Campaign's Welcoming Schools. They actually have curricula available for different ages that you could check into. Gender Spectrum is another great resource for that sort of thing. I sent over earlier a list of children's books that are about gender and gender rules and gender expectations. Some of them say it specifically, and some of them, like Red the Crayon is a favorite that is not. It's about, a blue crayon needing to be red, or vice versa. I don't remember, it's been a while. But there are great ways that you can address the topic of gender and stereotypes and that kind of thing in different ages. Usually kids are so much better than adults. So the younger that kids learn that there's diversity, the younger the kids learn that pink isn't just for girls and that anyone can love any color, it's a wonderful lesson to give. Even up into, middle school. I think middle school is horrible for everyone, but even in middle school, kids are generally more open-minded of, oh, well, if you would be happier that way, okay. And a lot of kids these days are really even understanding non-binary pronouns and fully embracing them in a way that I don't see adults doing. So I really think getting some of the curricula, just having conversations with teenagers about what makes you a guy. And what are there things that, have you ever felt like you have to hide something that you love? Like you wanted to learn piano instead of play baseball again. My son loves to, his favorite color is pink. And he is fully about embracing everything pink as a 15-year-old, including he plays airsoft. He wants a bright pink airsoft gun because it would be cool to be the only guy running around with a big pink gun. I think a lot of times kids are going to be much more open-minded than adults, and it would be you can be amazed at just having conversations with people of all ages about why do you think that is assigned to that gender, and get them questioning on their own, and they'll come up with some pretty interesting answers.
There are a lot of questions that are about kids in sports and social transitioning and gender affirming healthcare. There are a couple that I want to focus on just to give you a chance to clarify. One, I think is from someone who may not have heard quite what you were saying as I listened to you. How do you approach hormone therapy since your daughter will hit puberty? You're saying we need to accept our body because our spirit is what matters. So then how are you approaching hormone therapy? So I think you said something actually different than that, and I wanted to give you a chance to clarify.
Yeah, I don't think we should accept our bodies. Our spirit is what matters. And sometimes our bodies just have a mismatch. And I do believe it's biological. It's absolutely biological. The hormones that go to the body at about 6 weeks during gestation affect genitals. And around 20 weeks, there's another hormone wash that affects the brain. Sometimes they don't match. I absolutely believe there's a biological component. They have tried to change the brains of trans people for years and years. They used to do full frontal lobotomies. They used to do electroshock therapy. They used to try to give trans women a lot of testosterone, thinking they just didn't have enough testosterone to feel manly. All of those things failed, and they tortured people. So they decided instead, maybe we could change the body and support the mind. And people have thrived ever since. My daughter has been on puberty blockers. We started going in when we knew puberty was approaching to make sure that we could check and know when her body started to produce testosterone. and she now has a puberty blocker in her arm that is preventing that from happening. And she is so relieved. Like, she was terrified of having her voice change, or of growing a mustache, or having an Adam's apple. She did not want to look like her dad or her brother. Puberty blockers gave her such a sense of relief. And when it's time, she will go through hormone therapy. And later, if she wants, she can go through other therapies that will help her. It's her body and it's her choice. But she has been fully informed about every single thing all the way through. And, you know, kids are not just going in and getting medication like it's candy. There's a lot of support and therapy that goes with it, particularly when you have these clinics that are in children's hospitals. A lot of times there's a full cohort of social workers that work with the families, and the psychologists and psychiatrists who work with the kids, and then the endocrinologists and adolescent medicine doctors. There's a full team offering support to kids so that they do know what their choices are, and that they can be informed, and they can find a way to be comfortable with themselves.
And as I understand it, puberty blockers are reversible, so that for people who are wondering about, well, how do you know? And there was a question about a comment actually saying, well, children's brains aren't sufficiently developed to make this decision, was the word. And we're about out of time, but I wanted to give you a chance to provide some clarification there. And then I've got one last question for you that builds on another one that's in the chat.
Sure. I know people always say the brain isn't fully developed until age 25. Well, the age is relevant on every single person. You can't just say at 25 a switch turns on. And that might be for some sort of reasoning and a different part of our brain. Gender identity is an innate part of our brain. It's not in the same place. And we all have a gender identity. I'm pretty sure that person didn't need to get to 25 to determine what their gender was. Trans kids can know their gender at the exact same time that cisgender kids have. And as you said, that's usually around the ages of 2 to 5 that they know it and it becomes cemented. Sometimes they don't have the language to explain it until later, but it's an innate part of ourselves. It's not something that changes or has to get developed over time. And also, we allow kids to drive at 16 and to join the military at 17, and sometimes to get married before those ages. They're going to college and deciding career paths before they're 25. So we allow kids to do a lot of things before we say that they have fully developed brains. And I think we need to stop latching on to one number and realize that every single person has a gender and a gender identity. And the only ones we don't trust to know it are the trans kids.
Yeah. You know, someone asked, why are we talking about this now and we didn't 10 or 20 years ago? And I just want to say, in 1987, as a psychiatrist, I saw, you know, the first person was transgender in my work. And at that time, we really mistreated people who are transgender. So, you know, as you help us understand why are we talking about it now and differently, tell us also what you would like the future to be and what we can all do to help get to that future. That's my last question for you before we say goodbye.
Oh, it's such a big one. No, I think the future, what I want is just for people to respect a trans person and not be afraid of them. Realize that being trans is only one tiny part of who they are. It doesn't have to be the focus of every conversation. If they want to talk about it, if they're out and proud, that's a wonderful thing. But trans people just want to be respected like everyone else and live their lives like everyone else, and not be questioned by everyone around them. I mean, I can't imagine how mentally and emotionally exhausting it would be to have people question if I'm real every day of my life. So once we get to the point of just understanding that trans people are just as normal and natural as the rest of us, and get to know and celebrate all the other parts of who they are, as we would with any other person in our lives, it would be a beautiful, beautiful change.
Thank you so much, Debbie. It is so inspiring to get to be with you and so deeply moving. I'm just so glad that you were able to share being who you are and what you are living through and what you're fighting for with all of us. Thank you so much. And I think we got a bunch of people now who are going to be interested in figuring out how they can help you as you are fighting these legislative battles around the country, as I know you are. So I hope you'll all come back on May 12th, and we will have Terry Cross, who will be talking with us about Indigenous ways of understanding children, families in our world. And next week, we'll be starting our strengths-based approach to family engagement webinar series. Thank you again, Debbie. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we'll look forward to seeing you all again. And we're gonna do everything we can to help you and your family, Debbie. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that so much.